The blizzard came down like a curse from heaven itself, and Fiona Emerson knew she was going to die alone in the Nevada wasteland if she did not find shelter within the hour. Her horse had thrown a shoe 3 miles back, and she had been leading the limping mare through knee-deep snow ever since. Her fingers numb inside her gloves, her face burning with cold beneath the woolen scarf wrapped around her head. The year was 1884, and she had been foolish enough to think she could make it from Carson City to Reno before the worst of the winter storms hit. Now, as darkness gathered around her and the wind howled like a pack of wolves, she understood that pride and determination meant nothing against the brutal indifference of nature. She had left Carson City 3 days ago, carrying everything she owned in her saddlebags and a small trunk strapped behind her saddle. At 22 years old, she was starting over after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. A telegram had promised her a position as a schoolteacher in Reno, and she had set out with hope burning in her chest despite the warnings about the weather. The first 2 days had been cold but manageable. Then the storm had rolled in from the mountains, transforming the landscape into a white hell. Her horse whinnied in distress, pulling against the reins. Fiona's eyes were nearly frozen shut, but she forced them open and peered through the driving snow. Was that a light ahead? She blinked hard, certain she was seeing things, but no, there it was, a warm orange glow cutting through the white curtain of the storm. "Come on, girl," she urged the horse, her voice cracking. "Just a little further." Each step was agony. Her boots were soaked through, and she could no longer feel her toes. The light seemed to grow no closer, as if it were receding before her, a cruel mirage. But she pushed forward because the alternative was to lie down in the snow and let the cold take her. And Fiona Emerson had not survived 22 years of hardship to give up now. The light resolved itself into a window, and the window belonged to a small cabin tucked against a rocky outcropping that provided some shelter from the wind. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and Fiona felt tears freeze on her cheeks as she stumbled toward the door. She tried to call out, but her voice was lost in the storm. Instead, she pounded on the wooden door with her fist, 3 heavy thumps that took the last of her strength. The door opened, spilling warmth and light into the frozen night. A man stood silhouetted against the glow of a fireplace, tall and broad-shouldered, and Fiona tried to speak, tried to explain, but her legs gave out beneath her, and she fell forward into darkness. She woke to warmth and the smell of coffee. Her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself lying on a narrow bed covered with thick wool blankets. The cabin was small, just one room with rough-hewn log walls, a stone fireplace, and simple furniture that looked handmade. A pot bubbled on a hook over the fire, and the man she had seen in the doorway sat at a wooden table, watching her with concerned dark eyes. "Easy now," he said, rising from his chair. "You have been out for a couple of hours. I was starting to worry." Fiona tried to sit up, but her body protested. Every muscle ached, and her hands and feet burned with the fire of returning circulation. "My horse," she managed to say. "She is in the lean-to out back, out of the wind. I tended to her hoof and gave her feed and water. She will be fine." He moved to the fireplace and poured something from the pot into a tin cup. "Drink this. It is just broth, but it will help." He brought the cup to her, and Fiona got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that hung to his collar and a face that was lean and weathered from sun and wind. He wore a simple flannel shirt and denim pants, and his hands were calloused and strong. There was something careful in the way he moved, as if he was used to being alone and unaccustomed to having another person in his space. "Thank you," Fiona said, taking the cup. The broth was rich and salty, and it spread warmth through her chest as she sipped it. "I thought I was going to die out there. You nearly did. Your lips were turning blue when I brought you inside." He returned to his chair, maintaining a respectful distance. "Name is Owen Mallory. This is my winter camp. I run cattle in the valleys during the warmer months, but I hole up here when the snow comes." "Fiona Emerson," she replied. "I was trying to reach Reno. I have a position waiting for me there, teaching at the schoolhouse." Owen nodded slowly. "You are still about 8 miles from town." "This storm, it came on fast and hard, the worst I have seen in 5 years." He glanced toward the window where snow was still battering the glass. "It will not be safe to travel for a few days at least, maybe longer." Fiona felt panic rise in her throat. "But I am expected." "They will think I am not coming." "Better they think that than find your frozen body come spring," Owen said bluntly. "You can stay here until the storm passes. It is not much, but it is warm and dry, and I have provisions enough for 2. She looked around the cabin, noting the single bed, the small space. "I cannot impose on you like that. You are not imposing. You would have died if you had not found this place." His dark eyes met hers steadily. "I will not turn you out into a blizzard, Miss Emerson. That is not how I was raised." There was something in his voice, a quiet certainty that made Fiona relax slightly. She nodded, acknowledging the truth of his words. "Then I am grateful for your hospitality, Mr. Mallory, and please call me Fiona." "Owen," he replied. A slight smile touched his lips, the first she had seen. "Now finish that broth and rest. You need to recover your strength." Over the next few hours, Fiona learned the shape of Owen's life. He spoke little, but she pieced together the story from his brief comments and the things she observed. He had been working cattle in Nevada for 7 years, saving his money with the dream of buying his own land someday. He had no family left, his parents and younger sister having died of fever when he was 19. He was a man who had learned to be alone, to rely on himself, and there was a quiet melancholy about him that spoke of loneliness accepted but not necessarily welcomed. As evening came on, Owen gave Fiona the bed and made himself a pallet on the floor near the fireplace. She protested, but he was firm. "You need proper rest to recover. I have slept on harder ground than this." That night, Fiona lay awake listening to the wind howl around the cabin and the steady breathing of the man on the floor. She thought about the strange turns life could take, how she had set out alone and frightened and desperate, and ended up here in this rough cabin with a cowboy who had probably saved her life. She thought about his dark, serious eyes and the gentleness in his calloused hands when he had helped her drink the broth. Then she closed her eyes and slept more deeply than she had in months. The storm raged for 3 days. During that time, Fiona and Owen existed in a strange, isolated world bounded by the 4 walls of the cabin. He taught her to play cards, simple games to pass the time, and she found that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged once he grew comfortable with her presence. She told him about her father, a dreamer who had chased one failed venture after another until his death had left her penniless. She told him about her determination to make something of herself, to have a life of dignity and purpose. "Teaching is a good profession," Owen said on the 3rd night as they sat by the fire, playing another hand of cards. "Children need someone who cares about their learning." "Did you go to school?" Fiona asked. "Some. My mother taught me to read and write and do figures. After she died, there was not time for school anymore. I had to work." He laid down a card. "But I still read when I can. I have a few books here." Fiona glanced at the small shelf near the bed and saw a worn Bible, a volume of Shakespeare's plays, and a book on animal husbandry. The variety made her smile. "You are full of surprises, Owen Mallory. Because I read Shakespeare." He raised an eyebrow. Cowboys can appreciate good writing too. I did not mean to imply otherwise, Fiona said quickly. I only meant that you are not what I expected. And what did you expect? She considered this. Someone rougher, I suppose, more coarse. Owen was quiet for a moment. I have met men like that, men who let the hard life make them hard all the way through. I do not want to be that way. He looked at her directly. My mother used to say that a person should hold on to beauty and kindness wherever they can find it, because the world will try to strip those things away if you let it. Fiona felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, Owen said softly. I wish you could have met her. She would have liked you. On the fourth morning, Fiona woke to silence. The wind had stopped. She rose from the bed and went to the window, and her breath caught at the sight. The world outside was transformed into something from a fairy tale, everything buried under deep drifts of pristine white snow that sparkled in the weak winter sunlight. The sky was a pale, clear blue, and the air had the crystalline quality that comes after a great storm. Owen was already up, standing by the fireplace and pouring coffee. Storm has passed, he said, but we are snowed in deep. It will take me most of the day to dig us out enough to move around. I can help, Fiona offered. You are not dressed for it. Your clothes barely kept you alive before, and they are still damp. He handed her a cup of coffee. I will manage. But Fiona was not the sort to sit idle while someone else worked. She found some of Owen's spare clothes, a pair of trousers and a shirt that hung on her frame but were at least dry and warm. She rolled up the sleeves and legs and tied the waist with a rope, and when Owen saw her, he actually laughed, a sound that transformed his usually serious face. You look like a child playing dress-up, he said. I look practical, Fiona retorted. Now hand me a shovel. They worked together through the morning, clearing a path to the lean to where Fiona's horse was sheltered, then digging out the area around the cabin. The work was exhausting, but there was something satisfying about it, the simple physical labor and the teamwork. Fiona found herself watching Owen as he worked, noting the easy strength in his movements, the way his breath puffed white in the cold air. When he paused to rest, leaning on his shovel and looking out at the white landscape, she saw something in his expression that she recognized, a kind of hunger for something more than mere survival. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating a simple supper of beans and salt pork, Owen said, The way should be clear enough to travel tomorrow if the weather holds. I can guide you into Reno. Fiona felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. That is kind of you. I have already taken up too much of your time. It was not a hardship, Owen said. He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. Truth is, it has been good having someone to talk to. I forget sometimes how quiet it gets up here. You could come to town more often, Fiona suggested. Surely you need supplies or, I do not know, human companionship. I go when I need to. But towns, they are not really for me. Too many people, too much noise. He glanced at her. I suppose that sounds strange to someone like you. Someone like me. Someone who is educated, refined. You belong in a town with civilized folks, not stuck in a cabin with a rough cowboy. Fiona set down her plate and looked at him directly. Owen, I have not felt stuck here. These past few days, despite the danger and the discomfort, I have felt more at ease than I have in a long time. You saved my life, and you have treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. That makes you more civilized than half the supposedly refined people I have known. He met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. Fiona, he said, and her name on his lips sounded different than it ever had before, weighted with meaning. But then he shook his head and looked away. You should get some rest. We will leave at first light. That night, Fiona lay awake for a long time, listening to Owen's breathing and thinking about the morning. She had come to Nevada to start a new life, to build something stable and respectable. A teaching position, a place in the community, perhaps eventually a suitable marriage to a merchant or a clerk. That had been the plan, the safe and sensible plan. But now, as she lay in the darkness of this rough cabin, she found herself questioning that vision. She thought about Owen's quiet strength, his surprising gentleness, the loneliness he carried like a familiar burden. She thought about how she had felt these past days, useful and alive in a way she had not expected. And she wondered if safety and sense were really what she wanted after all. The journey to Reno the next day was slow and difficult. The snow was deep, and even with Owen breaking trail on his sturdy gelding, Fiona's mare struggled. They stopped frequently to rest the horses, and during one such stop, Owen pointed out landmarks and told her about the country. "That peak there, that is Mount Rose. The Washoe people, they have lived in these valleys for longer than anyone can remember. They know this land better than any white settler ever will." He spoke with a respect that Fiona found refreshing. Many of the men she had known spoke of the native peoples with contempt or fear, but Owen's tone held only admiration. "Have you spent time with the Washoe?" she asked. "Some. They taught me things about surviving in this country that I would never have learned otherwise. How to read the weather, where to find water in summer, which plants are good for medicine." He glanced at her. "There are people who think the Indians are savages, but that is ignorance talking. The Washoe are good people, and this was their home long before it was ours." Fiona filed this away, another piece of the puzzle that was Owen Mallory. A man who read Shakespeare and respected the native peoples, who lived alone but yearned for connection, who had saved her life without expecting anything in return. They reached the outskirts of Reno as the sun was beginning to set. The town was larger than Fiona had expected, a bustling community that had grown up along the railroad. Even in winter, the streets were busy with people going about their business, and the sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons. Owen led her to a respectable-looking boarding house on a quiet street. "Mrs. Patterson runs this place," he said. "She is a decent woman. You should be safe here while you get yourself settled." Fiona dismounted, suddenly reluctant for this journey to end. "Owen, I do not know how to thank you. You saved my life." "You do not need to thank me," he said. "Any decent person would have done the same." "That is not true, and you know it." She moved closer to his horse, looking up at him. In the fading light, his face was half in shadow. "Will I see you again?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Reno is a small town. I suppose our paths will cross." "I hope they do," Fiona said, and she meant it with an intensity that surprised her. Owen nodded, touched his hat in farewell, and turned his horse back toward the open country. Fiona watched him go until he was just a dark shape against the snow, and then she took her bags and went to start her new life. Mrs. Patterson was indeed a decent woman, a widow in her 50s who asked few questions and offered Fiona a clean room at a fair price. That night, Fiona lay in a proper bed with sheets and a quilt, but she found herself missing the rough wool blankets of Owen's cabin, the sound of the fire crackling, the sense of safe isolation from the world. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Fiona met with the school board, a group of earnest citizens who were pleased to finally have a proper teacher for their children. The previous teacher had left suddenly to get married, and the children had been without instruction for 2 months. Fiona threw herself into the work, preparing lessons and organizing the small schoolhouse, meeting her students and their families. The children ranged in age from 6 to 14, a mix of backgrounds and abilities. There were the children of merchants and railroad workers, the son of the town doctor, the daughters of a laundress who could barely afford to send them to school but was determined they should learn to read. Fiona found satisfaction in the work, in seeing the children's faces light up with understanding, in knowing she was making a difference. But at night, alone in her room at the boarding house, she thought about Owen. She wondered if he was back at his winter cabin, alone again in that small space. She wondered if he thought about her, if he remembered the quiet evenings by the fire, the easy companionship that had grown between them. She told herself she was being foolish, that she had known him for only a few days, that they came from different worlds. But her heart paid no attention to these sensible arguments. Nearly a month after her arrival in Reno, Fiona was leaving the general store with supplies for the schoolhouse when she saw him. Owen was leading his horse down the main street, his saddlebags bulging with provisions. Her heart leaped in her chest, and before she could think better of it, she called out his name. He turned, and his serious face broke into a smile that made him look years younger. "Fiona, I heard you were doing well with the school. You heard." She came closer, trying not to show how happy she was to see him. "Have you been asking about me?" A slight flush colored his cheeks. "Small town, people talk. I might have asked Mrs. Patterson how you were settling in when I saw her at church. You go to church?" Fiona could not keep the surprise from her voice. "Sometimes, when I am in town." He shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. "I am glad you are doing well. The children are lucky to have you." They stood there in the street, people passing around them, and Fiona felt the weight of all the things she wanted to say but could not. Finally, she asked, "How long are you staying in town?" "Just today. I needed to pick up some things, check on my horse at the livery." He threw a shoe. Owen glanced at the sky. "I should be heading back before dark." "Oh," Fiona tried to hide her disappointment. "Of course." "But," Owen said slowly, "I could stay for supper if you are not busy. There is a decent restaurant near the hotel, nothing fancy but the food is good." Fiona's heart soared. "I would like that very much." They met that evening at a small restaurant that served simple, hearty food. Over plates of roast beef and potatoes, they talked as easily as they had in the cabin, the conversation flowing naturally. Owen told her about his work, about the cattle he was tending and his plans for the spring. Fiona told him about her students, about the satisfaction she found in teaching and the small triumphs of the classroom. "There is a boy, Tommy Sullivan," she said. "He could barely read when I started, but now he is working his way through a whole book. You should see the pride on his face. It makes all the difficult days worthwhile." Owen listened with genuine interest, asking questions, and Fiona realized how rare it was to have someone truly listen to her, to care about the things that mattered to her. As the evening wore on, she found herself not wanting it to end. When they finally left the restaurant, the night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. Owen walked her back to the boarding house, their breath puffing white in the frozen air. At the door, he stopped and turned to her. "Fiona, I have been thinking," he said, "about what you said that last night at the cabin, about how you felt at ease there." "Yes," she said softly, "I felt it too. I have not been able to stop thinking about it, about you." He took a breath, as if steeling himself. "I know I am just a cowboy, and you are an educated woman with prospects. I know I have nothing to offer you but a hard life and an uncertain future. But I would like to see you again if you are willing. I would like to know you better." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of happiness. "Owen, you are not just anything. You are one of the finest men I have ever met, and yes, I would very much like to see you again." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking. "Really?" "Really," she confirmed, and then, bold as she had never been before, she reached out and took his hand. Come back next week. We could have supper again or take a walk if the weather is good." "I will be here," Owen promised. "You can count on it." True to his word, Owen came to town the following week and the week after that. Through the rest of that harsh winter, he made the journey from his camp to Reno regularly, braving cold and snow to spend time with Fiona. They took walks when the weather permitted, ate meals together, talked for hours about everything and nothing. Slowly, carefully, they built something precious between them. Owen told her about his dreams, about the piece of land he had his eye on, a valley with good grass and water where he could build a real ranch. Fiona told him about her fears, about the years of instability after her mother's death, about her hunger for a place to belong. They discovered shared values and unexpected compatibilities, a deep respect and affection that grew stronger with each meeting. The people of Reno noticed, of course. Small-town gossip being what it was, everyone soon knew that the schoolteacher was being courted by Owen Mallory, the quiet cowboy who kept to himself. Mrs. Patterson approved, telling Fiona that Owen was known as an honest, hard-working man. Some of the more refined ladies clucked their tongues and said Fiona could do better, but she paid them no mind. She knew what she wanted, and it was not refinement or social standing. It was the steady warmth in Owen's dark eyes, the gentle strength of his hands, the way he made her feel both safe and alive. Winter deepened, and then slowly began to turn. The days grew imperceptibly longer. The snow still fell, but with less fury. And through it all, Fiona and Owen grew closer, their relationship deepening from attraction to something far more profound. One evening in late February, as they sat in the restaurant that had become their place, Owen reached across the table and took her hand. "Fiona, there is something I need to say." She looked at him, seeing the nervous determination in his face. "What is it?" "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have loved you since that first night when you collapsed into my cabin more dead than alive. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you see the best in people. I love talking with you and being near you, and when I am away from you, I count the hours until I can see you again." Fiona felt her heart expand until it seemed too large for her chest. "Owen, wait. Let me finish," he said. "I know I am not much. I have some savings and a lot of dreams, but that is about it. I cannot offer you luxury or an easy life. But I can promise you that I will work every day to build something good for us. I can promise you loyalty and respect and all the love I have in me." He took a breath. "Fiona Emerson, will you marry me?" The restaurant seemed to fall away, and there was only Owen, his eyes fixed on her face, his hand warm around hers. Fiona thought about all the reasons she should say no, all the practical considerations and social expectations. And then she thought about how she felt when she was with him, how he had held her close that first night and kept her alive, how he had looked at her in the firelight and made her feel seen and valued in a way she had never experienced before. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was something Fiona knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He stood up, pulled her to her feet, and right there in the middle of the restaurant with everyone watching, he kissed her. It was not a chaste, proper kiss, but something deeper and truer, a promise and a claiming and a celebration all at once. The other diners applauded, and Fiona laughed against Owen's lips, happiness bubbling up inside her like champagne. When they finally broke apart, Owen said, "I want to do this right. I want to give you a proper wedding and a good home. It will take me a few months to get everything ready, to finish building the cabin on the land I have been saving for. Can you wait until spring?" "I can wait," Fiona said, though the thought of months without him was difficult. "But Owen, I do not need anything fancy, I just need you. "You will have me," he promised. "Forever." They set the wedding for May, when the worst of winter would be past and the valley would be green with new growth. Owen went back to his camp with renewed purpose, working on the cabin that would be their home, while Fiona continued teaching and began making quiet preparations for her new life. The winter was indeed harsh and cold, perhaps the coldest Nevada had seen in years, but Fiona bore it with patience because she knew what was coming. Owen came to town whenever he could, and they made plans and dreamed together, building a future in words before they could build it in reality. In March, a late storm swept down from the mountains, coating Reno in fresh snow and ice. Fiona stood at the window of the schoolhouse, watching the white world outside, and thought about that first storm, the one that had nearly killed her but had instead brought her to Owen. She touched the simple ring on her left hand, a band of silver that Owen had given her when they announced their engagement, and smiled. That evening, as she was closing up the schoolhouse, she heard the door open behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of the parents, and instead found Owen standing there, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Owen, what are you doing here? The weather is terrible." She went to him, brushing snow from his coat. "You should have stayed at your camp." "I needed to see you," he said. "I have been thinking about you all day, stuck in that drafty schoolhouse in the cold, and I just needed to know you were all right." Fiona's heart melted. "I am fine, more than fine, but you are here now, so come sit by the stove and get warm." They sat together on the bench near the small stove that heated the schoolhouse, and Owen pulled her close against his side. Fiona rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "The winter has been harsh and cold," Owen said softly, his breath stirring her hair. "But spring will come, Fiona. Spring will come and we will be married, and I will take you to our home in the valley. I will build you a life worth having, I swear it." "You already have," Fiona said, lifting her head to look at him. "You gave me a life worth having the moment you opened your door and let me in from the storm. Everything else is just details." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Fiona felt the truth of her words settle into her bones. The winter was harsh, yes, but she was not alone in it. She had found her place to belong, not in a town or a house, but in the heart of a good man who loved her. And that was worth more than all the comfort and security in the world. The storm blew itself out overnight, and the next morning dawned clear and bright. Owen left for his camp, but the memory of his words stayed with Fiona through the remaining weeks of winter. Spring will come. It was a promise and a prophecy, and she held it close like a talisman against the cold. April arrived, and with it came the first real signs of spring. The snow began to melt in earnest, streams swelling with runoff. Green shoots pushed up through the wet ground. Birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the air with song. And Fiona counted down the days until her wedding with a mixture of excitement and impatience. Owen came to town more frequently now, bringing news of the cabin's progress. He had finished the roof and the chimney, had built furniture with his own hands, had even planted a small garden that would produce vegetables by summer. His excitement was palpable, and Fiona loved seeing this side of him, the dreamer beneath the stoic cowboy exterior. The wedding was to be a simple affair, held in the small church at the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson had offered to host a small reception at the boarding house, and Fiona's students were bubbling with excitement about their teacher getting married. Several of the mothers had helped Fiona make a wedding dress from fabric she had purchased with her carefully saved wages, a simple gown of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. The night before the wedding, Fiona lay awake in her room at the boarding house, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Owen Mallory. Tomorrow, she would leave Reno and go with Owen to their valley, to start a life that was wholly different from anything she had imagined for herself. There was a flutter of nerves beneath the excitement, but it was the good kind of nervous, the anticipation of something wonderful about to begin. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm, the first truly beautiful day of spring. Fiona dressed with trembling hands, Mrs. Patterson helping her with the buttons and arranging her hair. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman transformed by love and hope, her eyes bright, her cheeks flushed with color. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Owen is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Fiona replied. The church was filled with well-wishers, more people than Fiona had expected. Her students sat in the front rows, scrubbed clean and dressed in their Sunday best, their faces shining with excitement. The minister stood at the altar, his Bible open. And there, waiting for her at the front of the church, was Owen. He wore a new suit, probably the first suit he had ever owned, and his dark hair was neatly combed. But it was his face that caught Fiona's attention, the expression of wonder and joy and love that transformed him as he watched her walk down the aisle. She felt tears prick her eyes as she moved toward him, toward their future. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They spoke their vows in clear voices, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with a tenderness that made Fiona's heart ache in the best possible way. The church erupted in applause, and they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, facing the world as partners. The reception at the boarding house was a joyful affair. There was food and drink and toasts, laughter and music. Fiona danced with Owen, her new husband, and felt as if she were floating. As the afternoon wore on, people began to drift away, and finally, it was time for Fiona and Owen to leave as well. They rode out of Reno together, Fiona on her mare and Owen on his gelding, their few possessions packed behind them. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the air was soft and warm with the promise of summer to come. As they left the town behind and headed into the open country, Fiona felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, riding beside this man into a future they would build together. The winter had been harsh and cold, but spring had come, just as Owen had promised. And with it came new life, new hope, new beginnings. They reached the valley as darkness was falling. Owen led her to a cabin that sat on a rise overlooking a stream, and in the last light of day, Fiona could see that it was sturdy and well built, with a good roof and a stone chimney. Smoke was already rising from that chimney, and as they approached, the door opened and a figure emerged. "I hope you do not mind," Owen said, a bit sheepishly. "I asked my friend Jacob to come out and get the fire started and put on some food so we would have a warm welcome. He left just a few minutes ago." Fiona laughed, delighted by this thoughtfulness. "I do not mind at all. That was very kind of him." Owen helped her dismount, then took both horses to a small barn to tend to them. Fiona went into the cabin and looked around at what would be her home. It was larger than Owen's winter camp, with 2 rooms instead of 1. The main room held a fireplace, a table and chairs, a sturdy workbench, and a rocking chair that looked new. The bedroom held a large bed made of pine, covered with a beautiful quilt that Fiona recognized as the work of Mrs. Patterson and some of the other ladies from town. Everything was simple but made with care, and Fiona felt tears sting her eyes as she realized how much work Owen had put into making this place ready for her. He had built her a home, not just a shelter but a real home, and the love embedded in every board and nail was almost overwhelming. Owen came in a few minutes later, brushing off his hands. He stopped when he saw her face. "Fiona, what is wrong? Do you not like it?" "I know it is not much, but it is perfect," Fiona interrupted, going to him. "It is absolutely perfect, Owen, thank you." He pulled her close, and they stood there in the warm glow of the fireplace, holding each other. "This is just the beginning," Owen said softly. "We will build something good here, Fiona. A life, a family, a future, I promise you." "I know," Fiona said. "I believe you." That night they had their first meal in their new home, simple stew that Jacob had left warming by the fire. They ate at the table Owen had made, and everything tasted better because they were together, because this was theirs. Later, they lay together in the big pine bed, and Owen held her close as they talked and laughed and dreamed until sleep finally claimed them both. The days that followed were filled with hard work and simple joys. Owen worked from sunrise to sunset, tending his cattle and improving their property. Fiona threw herself into making the cabin a true home, sewing curtains and planting flowers, learning to cook on the temperamental wood stove. She had always been capable, but ranch life demanded new skills, and she learned them eagerly. As spring turned to summer, the valley transformed into something almost unbearably beautiful. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in brilliant colors. The stream ran clear and cold, perfect for cooling off on hot afternoons. The cattle grew fat on the rich grass, and Owen's small herd began to look like the foundation of something substantial. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. Fiona learned to ride well enough to help Owen move the cattle, and he learned to appreciate having someone to talk to at the end of long days. They fell into rhythms and routines that felt comfortable and right, but beneath the daily work, their love continued to deepen and grow. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Owen had built, watching the sun set over the mountains, and talk about their future. Owen spoke of expanding the herd, of building a bigger barn, of someday having enough money to buy more land. Fiona talked about starting a small school in the valley for the scattered ranching families, about raising children who would know the value of both education and hard work. Children. The subject came up more frequently as summer progressed. They both wanted a family, wanted to fill their home with the sound of young voices and laughter. And so, it was with great joy that in late July, Fiona began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure, watching her body for signs, and when she was certain, she planned how to tell Owen. She waited for a perfect evening when the day's work was done and they were sitting on the porch, the sky painted in sunset colors. "Owen," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, his expression turning concerned. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," Fiona said, smiling. "I am expecting a baby. We are going to have a child." For a moment, Owen simply stared at her, as if he could not quite process the words. Then understanding dawned, and his face lit up with such joy that Fiona felt her own happiness redouble. "A baby? Fiona, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I am quite sure. By my calculations, the baby should come in late winter or early spring." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "This is the best news I have ever received." "A baby, our baby." He pulled back to look at her face. "How do you feel? Are you well? Do you need anything? Should we go to town to see the doctor?" Fiona laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I feel fine, just a little tired and queasy in the mornings." "And yes, we should go to town soon so the doctor can confirm and give me guidance. But Owen, I am healthy and strong. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." Over the following months, Owen was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He insisted Fiona rest more, that she not lift heavy things or work too hard. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, understanding that it came from love and the fear of losing what he cherished. They made several trips to Reno, where the doctor confirmed that Fiona was indeed pregnant and that everything looked normal and healthy. The news spread through the small ranching community, and neighbors they barely knew stopped by with gifts and advice. Mrs. Patterson sent a package filled with baby clothes and a warm letter of congratulations. Fiona's former students sent a card they had all signed. It seemed the whole world was celebrating this new life growing within her. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the golden light of harvest season, Fiona felt her body changing, adapting to the new life it carried. Her belly grew round, and she felt the first fluttering movements of the baby, sensations that filled her with wonder and a fierce protective love. When she told Owen she had felt the baby move, he placed his hand on her belly with such reverence that tears sprang to her eyes. "Our child," he said softly. "I can hardly believe it." Winter came again, but this winter was different from the last. This winter, Fiona was not alone in the storm. She had Owen beside her every moment, keeping the fire high, making sure she was warm and comfortable. The cabin that had seemed simple and rough now felt cozy and perfect, a safe haven against the cold world outside. As her time drew near, Owen became almost comically anxious. He had arranged for a midwife from a neighboring ranch to be present for the birth, and he checked and rechecked everything, making sure they had supplies and that the cabin was warm enough. Fiona found his nervousness endearing, even as she remained calm and confident. She had survived a blizzard and rebuilt her life from nothing. She could survive childbirth. The baby came on a cold February night, during a light snowfall that reminded Fiona of that first storm. The birth was hard, as births are, hours of pain and effort and fear. But Owen stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement and love. And when their son finally entered the world, healthy and squalling with indignation at the cold air, Fiona felt a completeness she had never known existed. "A boy," the midwife said, placing the cleaned and wrapped infant in Fiona's arms. "A strong, healthy boy." Fiona looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyes that seemed to already hold awareness, and fell instantly and irrevocably in love. Owen sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, and looked down at his son with an expression of awe. "He is perfect," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. "Fiona, you are incredible. Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," Fiona said, smiling up at her husband. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but now, looking at this actual person they had created, the decision took on new weight. Finally, Owen said, "What about Henry? It was my father's name. Henry Mallory." "Henry," Fiona repeated, testing the name. The baby turned his head at the sound, and she smiled. "I think he likes it. Henry Mallory it is." The days following Henry's birth were a blur of sleeplessness and joy. The baby was demanding, as babies are, but Owen was an involved father, walking the floor with Henry when he cried, changing his soiled cloths without complaint, marveling at every tiny yawn and stretch. Watching her husband with their son, Fiona fell in love with Owen all over again, seeing new depths of tenderness in him. As winter slowly gave way to spring again, Henry grew and thrived. He was a healthy baby with a strong voice and an appetite to match, and Fiona spent hours just watching him, amazed that she and Owen had created this perfect little person. One warm afternoon in late March, as they sat on the porch with Henry sleeping in Fiona's arms, Owen said, "Do you remember last year when we were still courting and that late storm hit?" "Of course," Fiona said. "You came to the schoolhouse to check on me, even though the weather was terrible. I told you the winter was harsh and cold, but that spring would come. Owen reached over and gently touched Henry's small hand, which immediately closed around his finger. I was talking about the actual season, but also about us, about our future. I was trying to tell you that the hard times would pass and we would have something beautiful. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. You were right. Spring did come. More than that, Owen said, looking at her with those dark eyes that still made her heart skip. Spring keeps coming. Every day with you and now with Henry, it feels like spring, like new life and new hope. I love you, Fiona said, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling in her heart. I love you so much, Owen Mallory. And I love you, Fiona Mallory. He leaned over and kissed her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. Forever and always. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple pleasures. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Owen's herd grew larger, and he became known in the area as a man who kept his word and treated his animals well. Fiona started the small school she had dreamed of, teaching the children of neighboring ranches in the cabin 3 days a week. It was not the proper schoolhouse she had once taught in, but it was more satisfying somehow, more personal. Henry grew from an infant to a toddler to a bright, curious little boy who followed his father around the ranch and asked endless questions. When he was 3, Fiona became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in the summer, a tiny red-faced bundle they named Sarah after Owen's mother. With 2 children, the cabin felt almost too small, so Owen spent that winter building an addition, creating more space for their growing family. He worked by lantern light after the day's ranch work was done, driven by the desire to provide for those he loved. Fiona sometimes stood at the window, watching him work, and felt such gratitude for this life they had built together. Sarah was a calm baby, easier than Henry had been, and she grew into a sweet-natured child who adored her older brother. Watching Henry with his little sister, seeing the protective way he treated her, Fiona recognized Owen in their son and felt blessed beyond measure. More years passed. The children grew. The ranch expanded. Owen eventually bought the land he had been leasing, making it officially theirs. They added more rooms to the house, until it was no longer really a cabin but a proper ranch house. They acquired chickens and pigs, planted a larger garden, built a second barn. Slowly, steadily, they created something of substance and value. Through it all, the love between Fiona and Owen remained the foundation of everything. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they never went to bed angry, always talking through their problems until they reached understanding. They had their hard times, years when the cattle prices dropped or the weather was uncooperative, but they faced those challenges together, drawing strength from each other. When Henry was 8 and Sarah was 5, Fiona became pregnant again. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous 2, and there were moments when Fiona felt her age, felt the wear of years of hard work and childbearing. But when their second son was born, another healthy baby boy they named James, she forgot all the discomfort in the flood of love for this new little person. Owen was 40 by then, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples, his face more deeply lined from years of sun and wind. But to Fiona, he was more handsome than ever, matured like good whiskey into something rich and mellow. And when he held their newborn son, his strong hands so gentle with the tiny bundle, she fell in love with him all over again, just as she did every day. The children grew up surrounded by love and the values their parents held dear. Owen taught them to work hard, to respect the land and animals, to keep their word. Fiona taught them to read and write and think, to appreciate beauty, to be kind. Together, they raised children who were confident and capable, who knew they were loved beyond measure. Evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Fiona and Owen would sit on the porch as they had since the beginning, watching the stars come out and talking about their day. Sometimes they spoke of serious things, plans and concerns. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, needing no words to express what they felt. One such evening, when James was 3 and the older children were growing fast, Owen said, "Do you ever regret it? Giving up teaching in town, living this rough life instead of something more refined?" Fiona looked at him in surprise. "Never. Not for a single moment. This life, this family, this is everything I ever wanted, even before I knew I wanted it. When I saw you in that doorway that first night, half frozen and barely alive, I had no idea you would change my life so completely," Owen said. "I thought I was just helping someone in need. I did not know I was opening the door to my future." "The winter was harsh and cold," Fiona said softly, "but spring came just as you promised." "And it keeps coming," Owen replied, pulling her close. "Every spring with you is a gift I never take for granted." As the years continued to pass, their ranch became a landmark in the valley, a place known for fair dealing and good stock. Henry grew into a young man much like his father, steady and hardworking with a quiet strength. Sarah became a beauty with her mother's compassion and her father's practical nature. Young James was the wild one, full of energy and mischief, keeping his parents on their toes. When Henry turned 18, he announced his intention to stay on the ranch and work alongside his father. Owen could not hide his pleasure at this news, and they began to work together as partners, planning the ranch's future. Sarah showed an aptitude for teaching, and Fiona began training her to eventually take over the small school. James was still finding his way, but he had time yet. Fiona was 44 when she realized she was pregnant again, a surprise after so many years. The pregnancy was difficult, her body no longer young enough to carry a child easily. The doctor warned her of risks, and Owen was beside himself with worry, torn between joy at another child and fear for Fiona's health. "If something happens to you," he said one night, holding her as she rested in bed, "I do not know what I would do." "Nothing is going to happen to me," Fiona assured him, though privately she shared some of his fear. "I am tough, remember, I survived a blizzard. I can survive this." The labor, when it came, was long and hard. For hours, Fiona labored while Owen paced outside, Henry keeping him company and offering what comfort he could. Sarah was with her mother, holding her hand and wiping her face, as brave as any grown woman. And when the baby finally came, a tiny but healthy daughter, the relief was overwhelming. They named her Rose for the wildflowers that bloomed in the valley each spring. She was a miracle, this late blessing, and the whole family doted on her. Henry and Sarah, nearly grown, treated her like a precious doll. James, 12 and at that awkward age, alternated between embarrassment at having a baby sister and fierce protectiveness. As Rose grew from baby to toddler, Fiona watched her older children begin to make their own lives. Henry courted a girl from a neighboring ranch, and at 20, he married her in a ceremony that brought tears to both Fiona's and Owen's eyes. Watching their firstborn take his vows, Fiona remembered her own wedding day, how young and uncertain she had felt, how much she had grown since then. Sarah left to attend a teacher's college in Carson City, but she came home often, and Fiona knew she would eventually return to stay, to take over the valley school and find her own happiness. James was talking about becoming a horse trainer, his natural way with animals suggesting he had inherited his father's gift. And through it all, Through the changes and the growing up and the letting go, Fiona and Owen remained each other's constant. They had been married more than 20 years now, had weathered everything life threw at them, and their love had not diminished, but only deepened with time and shared experience. One evening, as they sat on the porch with Rose playing at their feet, now a lively 3-year-old, Owen said, "I have been thinking about that first winter when you came into my life. We have been married for over 2 decades, and you still think about that?" Fiona teased gently. "Every day," Owen said seriously, "because that was when my real life started. Everything before that was just marking time, just existing. You taught me how to live, Fiona. You and our children, you made me into someone I never thought I could be." Fiona reached over and took his hand, the same hand that had held her through blizzards and births, through hard times and good. "We made each other," she said. "That is what love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves." "I would not change a single thing," Owen said. "Not the hard times or the struggles. It all led us here to this moment, to this life." "Neither would I," Fiona agreed, watching Rose chase a butterfly across the porch. "Not one single thing." The years continued their steady march. Rose grew into a bright, spirited child who kept her aging parents young. Henry and his wife had children of their own, making Fiona and Owen grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. Sarah came home from college and did indeed take over the Valley School, and she was courted by the son of a local rancher, a kind young man who clearly adored her. James became a skilled horse trainer, his reputation spreading through the region. He was offered a position at a large ranch in California, and after much soul-searching, he decided to take it, though he promised to visit often. Watching him ride away, Fiona cried, but they were bittersweet tears, pride and sadness mixed together. Owen turned 50, then Fiona did. They were slower now, feeling the years in their joints and muscles, but they were still active, still engaged in life. Owen handed over more of the ranch's daily operations to Henry, but he still rode out most days, still kept his hand in. Fiona still taught occasionally, though Sarah had taken over the bulk of it. They settled into a comfortable rhythm, enjoying their grandchildren and each other. One winter evening, nearly 25 years after they had first met, another blizzard swept down from the mountains. It was not as severe as that first storm, but it was fierce enough to keep everyone inside, huddled by the fire. Owen built up the blaze while Fiona made hot cocoa for Rose, who was now 7 and learning to read. As the wind howled outside, Fiona found herself remembering that other storm, how terrified she had been, how close to death. She remembered stumbling through the snow, certain she would not survive. And then she remembered the light in the window, the warmth of Owen's cabin, the moment her life had changed forever. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, coming to sit beside her. "That first storm," Fiona said. "How different my life would be if I had not found your cabin. I might have died out there, frozen and alone. Or perhaps someone else would have found me and I would have lived but never known you, never had this life. It is strange to think how much hangs on chance." "It was not chance," Owen said firmly. "It was meant to be. You were meant to find my cabin and I was meant to open the door. We were meant to be together, Fiona. I have always believed that." "So have I," she said, leaning into his warmth. "So have I." The storm blew itself out overnight and the next morning dawned clear and bright. Owen and Henry went out to check on the livestock, while Fiona helped Rose with her lessons. Later, when the work was done, Fiona wrapped herself in a heavy coat and walked out to the edge of their land, looking over the snow-covered valley that had been her home for so many years. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the twists and turns of fate. She thought about her father and her early life, about the struggles and the losses. She thought about that desperate winter journey and the man who had saved her life. And she thought about all the years since, the love and the work and the family they had built together. The winter was harsh and cold, yes, but spring always came. That was the lesson, the truth that had sustained her through difficult times. No matter how hard the season, no matter how frozen and barren the landscape, spring always came. New life always followed death, hope always followed despair, love always triumphed over loneliness. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Owen approaching, his breath puffing white in the cold air. He came and stood beside her, slipping his arm around her waist, and they looked out over their land together. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. "It is cold." "Just thinking," Fiona said. "Remembering, being grateful. Grateful for what? For everything. For you, for our children, for this life. For that storm that brought me to your door." She turned to look at him, this man who had been her partner and her love for a quarter-century. "For every moment we have had together." Owen pulled her close, and they stood there in the cold, holding each other as they had so many times before. "The winter was harsh and cold," he said softly, echoing the words he had spoken to her all those years ago, "but spring came. And it keeps coming, Fiona. It keeps coming." "I know," she said. "I know." The years continued, as years do, bringing more changes and new joys. Sarah married her young man and gave Fiona and Owen more grandchildren to spoil. James came home from California with tales of the big ranches and the wild horses he had trained. And eventually, he came home to stay, ready to settle down on the land he had grown up on. He built a cabin of his own on the far edge of the property and married a girl from Reno, continuing the family's growth. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's steady nature. She talked about becoming a nurse, about going away to study, and while Fiona would miss her terribly, she encouraged her daughter's ambitions. She remembered what it was like to want more, to reach for a bigger life, and she would never stand in the way of her children's dreams. Owen turned 60, his hair now fully gray, his face deeply lined. But he was still strong, still active, though he let Henry and James handle more of the ranch work. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope, passing on his knowledge and his values. Fiona, too, was in her 60s now, her once dark hair liberally streaked with silver. Her hands were no longer smooth but work-roughened, her face showing the years of sun and wind. But she had never felt more beautiful, because she saw herself reflected in Owen's eyes. And in his eyes, she was still the young woman who had stumbled into his cabin during the storm, brave and determined and full of life. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, with their whole family gathered around them, children and grandchildren filling the house with noise and laughter. As Fiona looked around the crowded room, she felt such overwhelming gratitude that she had to excuse herself, stepping out onto the porch for a moment of solitude. Owen found her there, as she had known he would. He always found her. "Too much excitement?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just needed a moment," Fiona said. "Looking at everyone in there, all these lives we created, it is overwhelming in the best way." 30 years, Owen said wonderingly. "Has it really been that long?" "It has, and it feels like both forever and no time at all." Fiona took his hand, their fingers interlacing automatically, a gesture so familiar it required no thought. "Thank you for these 30 years, Owen. Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for saying yes," Owen replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a rough cowboy who had nothing but dreams and determination. You had so much more than that. You had a good heart and gentle hands and the capacity to love deeply. That was everything I needed." Fiona turned to face him fully. "I love you, Owen Mallory." I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for 30 more if we are blessed with them." "And I love you, Fiona Mallory," Owen said, and he kissed her there on the porch with their family's laughter floating out through the windows and the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The years rolled on, bringing their share of sorrows along with the joys. Henry's wife died suddenly of pneumonia, leaving him a widower with 3 young children. Fiona and Owen helped him through his grief, caring for the children and keeping the ranch running while Henry found his footing again. It was hard, watching their son suffer, but they were there for him, as they had always been there for all their children. James and his wife had a daughter with a weak heart, and they spent anxious months nursing her, praying she would survive. She did, growing stronger with time, and the experience bonded the whole family even more closely. In the hard times, they learned again and again the value of love and family, of having people who would stand by you no matter what. Rose went away to study nursing and came back educated and capable, working at the small hospital in Reno. She courted a young doctor there, and when she was 25, she married him in a ceremony that reminded Fiona so much of her own wedding that she cried through the entire service. Owen's health began to fail when he was 68. Nothing dramatic, just the slow decline of a body worn out from years of hard use. He could no longer ride for long hours or do heavy lifting. Some mornings, his joints were so stiff he could barely get out of bed. But he remained cheerful, joking that he had earned the right to take it easy. Fiona watched over him with a mixture of concern and acceptance. They were old now, both of them in their late 60s. They had lived full lives, had loved deeply, had built something lasting. Whatever time they had left, they would face it together, as they had faced everything. On a spring evening, nearly 40 years after they had first met, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The valley was green with new growth, wildflowers blooming in brilliant profusion. The air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of grass and earth and growing things. "Spring," Owen said softly. "It never gets old, does it? Every year it feels like a miracle." "It is a miracle," Fiona agreed. "New life, new hope, another chance." "I have been thinking," Owen said, "about that first spring after we met. How eager I was for the snow to melt so I could marry you and bring you home. How I worked on this cabin, trying to make it good enough for you." "It was always good enough," Fiona said, "because you were here. Do you remember what I said to you that night at the schoolhouse? When that late storm came through, of course I remember. You said the winter was harsh and cold, but spring would come." "And I was right," Owen said. "Spring came. And it brought you into my life, and you brought love and joy and meaning. You gave me a family, a reason to work hard, a reason to be the best man I could be. You have been my spring, Fiona, every day for 40 years. Fiona felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "And you have been mine. You saved my life in that storm, Owen, but you did more than that. You gave me a life worth saving, a life beyond anything I had imagined." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands as the sun sank below the mountains and the stars began to appear. Around them, the ranch was quiet, the day's work done. Somewhere in the house, grandchildren were laughing. The cattle were settled in the pastures. Everything was as it should be. "No regrets?" Owen asked, the question he had asked before over the years. "Not a single one," Fiona replied, the answer she had always given. "This life with you, it has been everything." Owen raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Mine too, mine too." The years continued their relentless march. Owen's health declined further, and there came a day when he could no longer get out of bed without help. Fiona cared for him with the same love and devotion he had shown her through 42 years of marriage, bathing him and feeding him and sitting with him for hours, just holding his hand. Their children came often, and the grandchildren too, filling the house with life and noise. Owen loved to see them, though he tired easily. On good days, he would tell them stories of the old times, of wild horses and harsh winters and the early days of the ranch. On bad days, he mostly slept, but even then he smiled when Fiona was near one morning in late winter, when the snow was still deep but the days were beginning to lengthen. Owen woke with unusual clarity in his eyes. "Fiona," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Sit with me." She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his hand. "I am here. I am always here." "I need you to know," Owen said, "that these years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Every single day, even the hard ones, has been precious because I spent it with you. I would not trade one moment, not one single moment." "Owen, do not talk like this," Fiona said, though she knew what was coming, had known for weeks. "You are going to be fine. Spring is almost here." "Spring will come," Owen said, echoing the words that had become their talisman, their promise to each other. "It always does. But this time I do not think I will see it, and that is all right, Fiona. I have seen so many springs with you. I have been blessed beyond measure." "No," Fiona whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, not yet. I am not ready." "You are ready," Owen said gently. "You are the strongest person I know. You will grieve as you should, but then you will go on. You will see more springs, watch our grandchildren grow, maybe even meet great-grandchildren. You will live, Fiona, because that is who you are. You are a survivor." "I do not want to survive without you," she said. "Yes, you do. You will, because I am asking you to." He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "Promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy. Promise me you will not just exist, but truly live." "I promise," Fiona choked out, though the thought of a world without Owen was unbearable. "I love you," Owen said. "I have loved you from the moment you fell into my cabin during that storm. I will love you beyond my last breath and into whatever comes after. You are my heart, Fiona Mallory. You always will be." "And you are mine," Fiona said, lying down beside him, careful of his frail body. She put her head on his shoulder as she had done thousands of times over the years. "Forever and always, you are mine." They lay together as the morning light grew stronger, and Owen's breathing gradually slowed and became more labored. Their children came in one by one to say goodbye, but Fiona never left his side. She held him as he had held her so many times, giving him the comfort of her presence, her love, her devotion. As the sun reached its zenith, Owen drew one more breath, then let it out slowly and was still. Fiona felt the moment his spirit left, felt the absence of the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything. And she wept, her tears falling on his still face, mourning the loss of the best man she had ever known. The days that followed were dark. Fiona went through the motions of the funeral, accepted condolences from friends and neighbors, watched as they buried Owen on a rise overlooking the valley he had loved. She stood dry-eyed through the service, numb with grief too deep for tears. But in the nights, alone in the bed they had shared for 42 years, she wept until she thought her heart would break. The house felt empty without him, the silence oppressive. She did not know how to be just herself, not half of a pair. For more than 4 decades, she had been Owen's wife, and now that identity was gone, and she did not know who she was supposed to be. Her children rallied around her, taking turns staying at the house, making sure she ate and slept. Henry ran the ranch with James's help, keeping the operation going. Sarah came from town as often as she could, bringing her children to distract Fiona. Rose moved back home for a while, her nursing skills useful in caring for her grieving mother. Slowly, painfully, Fiona began to heal. The raw wound of loss scabbed over, though she knew it would never fully close. She began to take an interest in things again, to notice the grandchildren growing, to care about the ranch's fortunes. She started teaching again at the Valley School, finding solace in the routine and the children's eager faces. Winter gave way to spring, as it always did. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth underneath. Green shoots appeared, then wildflowers. The cattle moved to higher pastures as the grass grew. And Fiona, watching the world renew itself, thought about Owen's last words. Spring would come. It always did. She began to take walks in the evenings, going to the rise where Owen was buried. She would sit beside his grave and talk to him, telling him about her day, about the family, about the world that kept turning even though he was gone. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, she felt his presence, felt the certainty that he was still with her in some way, still loving her from wherever he had gone. 1 year passed. Then 2. The grief never disappeared, but it became more manageable, something she could carry without it crushing her. She found joy again in small moments, in a grandchild's laughter, in a beautiful sunset, in the satisfaction of a good day's work. She lived, as she had promised Owen she would, not just existing but truly living. On what would have been their 45th anniversary, Fiona went to Owen's grave with wildflowers gathered from the meadow. She sat beside the simple headstone and spoke to him in the soft voice she had always used when they were alone. 45 years since we married, she said. Can you believe it? I still remember that day so clearly, how nervous and happy I was, how you looked at me like I was something precious. She arranged the flowers carefully. I miss you every day, Owen, every single day, but I am living like I promised. I am finding joy where I can. I hope you are proud of me. The wind rustled through the grass, and a meadowlark sang nearby, and Fiona chose to believe these were Owen's answer. She sat for a while longer, then rose to go, pausing to touch the headstone gently. Spring came again, she said softly. Just like you always promised. It always comes. Fiona lived another 8 years, reaching the age of 76. They were good years, full of family and purpose. She watched her grandchildren marry and have children of their own, giving her great-grandchildren to spoil. She continued teaching until her health began to fail, passing on her love of learning to another generation. She maintained the ranch as a family operation, all of her children and several grandchildren working together to keep Owen's dream alive. When her time came, it was peaceful, a gradual fading rather than a sudden loss. She died in her sleep on a spring morning with the window open and the scent of wildflowers drifting in. Her children found her with a smile on her face, and though they grieved, they also celebrated, knowing she had lived a full and meaningful life, knowing she was reunited with the man she had loved for so long. They buried her beside Owen on the rise overlooking the valley. The entire community came to the funeral, testament to the impact she had made through decades of teaching and kindness. Her children spoke of her strength and her love, her determination and her grace. Her grandchildren remembered her stories and her wisdom. And when it was over, when everyone had said their goodbyes, the family stood together looking out over the land that had been built on Fiona and Owen's love. They had a good life, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. A really good life. They did, Sarah agreed. And they loved each other until the very end and beyond. The winter was harsh and cold, James said softly, remembering his father's favorite phrase, but spring came. It always does, Rose added. It always does, and it was true. Spring came again that year and every year after. The ranch continued to thrive under family management, passing through generations just as Owen and Fiona had hoped. Their children told their children about the cowboy and the schoolteacher who had found each other during a blizzard, who had built a life and a legacy of love that endured long after they were gone. The cabin where they had first lived together was preserved as part of the ranch's history, and sometimes grandchildren and great-grandchildren would go there to feel connected to their ancestors. They would stand in that small space and imagine what it must have been like. Two young people starting a life together with nothing but hope and determination and love. The story of Fiona and Owen became part of the valley's folklore, told and retold, embellished and celebrated. The school teacher who had nearly died in a blizzard. The cowboy who had saved her and then married her. The love that had sustained them through 42 years of marriage and had left a legacy that continued to grow and flourish. And every spring, when the snow melted and the wildflowers bloomed and the valley turned green with new life, the family remembered and gave thanks. They remembered that winter was harsh and cold, but spring always came. They remembered that love endured beyond death, that family was the greatest treasure, that hard work and determination could build something lasting. The winter was harsh and cold, but the cowboy had held her close and promised that spring would come. And he had been right. Spring came, bringing with it new life and new hope. Again and again and again, forever and always, a cycle as eternal as love itself.